So, I think in front of us today, Ross, we've got a dram that I think we're both familiar with, Bevvy sort of fair and sailing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's one I've had a few times. It's I wouldn't go as far as saying it's a comfort dram for me, but it's one I do enjoy, so I'm looking forward to opening the bottle and trying it today.
Yeah, distillery's a distillery I'm really fond of. One of the few family-owned left.
Yeah.
A kind of a classic, iconic Speyside distillery as well, owned by the Grant family. And one of the few that are still exclusively maturing all of their whiskey in sherry casks.
Yeah.
Which is kind of an expensive thing to promise.
Yeah, absolutely.
So even if it's their youngest product, or like the 10-year-olds here at 40% alcohol, all the way up to their 50, 60-year-olds, they're really consistent in that, whether they're seasoning their own casks or buying them in from Jerez. So I'm looking forward to it. I know I like this style.
Yeah.
I visited the distillery, actually, not too long ago. And it's one of those things that I don't know if it's too good to be true, this family-owned and honesty and authenticity. The tour's free, standard tour's free, and you get whiskey at the end of it. And I remember going up a couple of summers ago, and we'd actually had a pretty good summer in Scotland. And right on one side of Ben Rinnes, in the heart of Speyside. And they get all of their water from the reservoir from one side of Ben Rinnes. That's the deal they have, the contract they have. All of our water has to come from this side of Ben Rinnes. And we go up and say, well, it's actually been a really hot summer, so we're only actually in production for 3 days this week. Now, they could have been saying that as a silo of water went behind me. It seems really romantic nowadays for a distillery when there's so much money to be made in whiskey to say, actually, no, this is how we do it, this is how we've always done it. We're not just going to mass produce it. I mean, I know, having worked for a big whiskey company beforehand, let's just say somebody like Diageo, if Talisker's water source was drying up, they can't afford to not make the whiskey. Mm-hmm. So there would have been certainly a solution to that problem, whereas I quite like turning up at Glenfarclas and they say, no, we're not in production, we don't have enough water. And you go, that affects your marketing and your sales in 10, 15, 20 years' time. It's really quite amazing. I thought it was really good of them to be as transparent as they were, whether it was true or not. I'm not 100%, but they got me sold for sure.
Yeah, I think, as you said, the fact they're family-owned, it ties in with that sort of old-fashioned, traditional idea of whiskey making, and obviously if they're dropping wee nuggets like it, that when you go and visit them, true or otherwise, it ties into that.
It's romantic, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think that the family are also still active and run the distillery. It's not one of these family-owned and somebody else is running it. I think something that's worth mentioning at Glenfarclas that people might not know is the kind of vintages that they do too. They're really the only distillery out with Balblair used to do it. They do I don't know if you've ever seen the Family Cask series.
Yeah, very familiar with it. It's been going on for a good few years now, hasn't it?
Since the 1950s.
Yeah.
So they have a cask since, I want to say 53, but I could be wrong, all the way up till now. And every single year they're putting it aside. So it's one of those things that if you're looking to buy a gift for somebody and you want the birth year, they're really the only distillery you can definitely go and do that at, which is quite good too, as well as having their standard age statements. Unpeated, classic Speyside style.
Yeah, and as I said, sherry casks as well, which I think lends quite well to their spirit.
And as I say, it could be third or fourth fill. I mean, it's one of those things that, again, they are quite transparent. Even some of their older whiskies, it will say fourth fill, but.
Yeah.
So a lot of people wouldn't call that a sherry influence now. They would call that a refill cask.
Yeah.
But I think for them to be able to stretch, what they're doing, because it is so expensive to buy a sherry butt now. You're talking about in the 1980s, people actually did drink sherry. And so therefore there was casks that were being produced and they were available. Nowadays, Scotch whisky and sherry matured Scotch whisky is so big that the sherry's almost become a bit of a byproduct of the cask, which is kind of sad to say.
Aye.
But honestly, that's what Glenfarclas and Macallan do. They now buy American oak casks, chuck some sherry in it for a couple of years, get rid of the sherry and made themselves a cask. It just takes a bit more patience.
It's what they call it, sherry seasoning, rather than it being,
so it still qualifies.
Cask, yeah.
What do you think about it? I suppose in that way they're actually getting more control over the cask.
Yeah. There's going to be less variability if they're getting the same wood, putting the same sherry in
it's all about
seasoning
relationships, right?
Yeah.
But if you're filling your own cask, maturing it and developing it and then using it for your whiskey, you're kind of got a wee bit more control as well. So it's quite interesting to see it. It's very forward thinking. Let's have a look. I think we should open it and see what we think.
Get stuck in.
I think at 40%, this is probably, their 10-year-old is one of the kind of entry-level single malts. It's a really good price as well.
Yeah, as I said, it's not It's fairly common. You will see it in like the odd supermarket over here in the UK. But that's not to discredit it, even though it is sort of widely available, widely produced.
I think it's good to say that people aren't massive whiskey drinkers. Not only you can get something that's new and approachable for you, but also authentic, family owned. And a lot of people go, if you're starting in whiskey, you have to kind of start with the big brands. But this is probably a good example of not having to do that. It's been a while since I've had this, to be honest.
So see how it lives up to memory.
Yeah, they do a 15-year-old, which is 46% as well. And they're always been very fairly priced, even their much older whiskey.
Yeah, I remember when I first started working in whiskey, like their 21-year-old was like the cheapest 21-year-old you could get, and cheap in a good way. You know, it was still fantastic whiskey.
Really good whiskey.
Really, really nice.
Through the 1980s, so let's have a little taste first, but they basically took a massive gamble. We know in the 80s, Scotch whisky was really on a downturn and most people were cutting production. Glenfarclas actually doubled their production in the 1980s.
Okay.
So really risky.
Yeah.
But it meant that actually for older stock, not only did they have it, but they didn't have to take the piss with prices either.
Aye, when the market came back round, they were in a really strong position.
It doesn't smell too sherried.
No.
It's got a kind of light, fresh, sweet nose.
Yeah, there is like for me there is a touch of like sort of toffee caramel, which I find like is a kind of hallmark of it.
Subtle Rosso note, maybe. What do you think?
Very pleasant.
I think it's really nice.
Quite okay actually for quite a young whiskey. Quite a low ABV. Just quite a sort of woody kind of flavour coming through there.
A really nice sweetness as well. It's sort of sweet and savoury with the woodiness. It's really pleasant, very easy drinking, very little alcohol burn for me. It is the minimum percentage of alcohol, 40%, but easy drinking. I think what I get a lot of Glenfarclas is kind of pear on the nose, which is really unusual for sherry. It's something that you expect with a bourbon cask. But I do still think you get that little bit of pear. I think maybe it's the spirit character, which again, it's not something you expect with sherry. So
yeah, I'm maybe not getting like the pear, but definitely fruitier. Like going back to it, but you're right. That sort of soft, sort of white fruits. It's more sort of like red apple kind of influence for me. But
I think it's something that but red apple's a good note for it too. It's just nice to try something that isn't a big name, big brand. They've not updated their bottles in a while. It's quite iconic though, the short bottle and the cheap label. Yeah, it's very recognisable, isn't it?
Yeah, there's something quite clean about it, isn't there? And the fact that as I said, they've not changed it for so long, it's clearly working for them.
It's quite comforting. The brand, I think, especially if you have been seen as the affordable, even at a higher end, there will be people who, this will be their favourite whiskey and it'll be all they drink. Yeah. It can be a little bit cultish with that kind of thing. But interesting, quite a short finish.
Yeah, I think that's maybe the one negative point for me is that once it tastes great, smells great, but there's not much of a finish, like a touch of like a sort of lingering spice, but not much.
But again, for the value.
Yeah, for the price of the whiskey and for the age, it's kind of to be expected, really.
I think so. I'm really glad I got to try it with you.
So if you were to sort of recommend the Glenfarclas to someone, would it be as a sort of entry whiskey, or would you sort of still recommend it to people who are into it?
I think when we speak to a lot of people that are trying to get into whiskey, Speyside is kind of where you lead them because it's the easiest, kind of baby steps into Scotch whiskey. You stick a Lafroig under somebody's nose. How many times have you heard that story of people never going back to whiskey? Whereas this has been quite easy, approachable. Add some water maybe the first time you have it. I know it looks at 40%, but just take your time with it. It's light, it's easy going, but there is still spice. It is still a single malt Scotch whisky, so it is still quite heavy hitting. Start with a blended whisky as well, and then move on to something like this. But I would recommend it for sure.
Excellent. Well, cheers.
Cheers.
If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more Bevvy content. We want to hear what you think, your best whiskey experiences, the whiskies you want us to try. It's a really exciting journey we're on, so make sure to join us. Download the Bevvy app on Google Play and App Store to keep track of your whiskey journey, connect with your whiskey friends, keep track of your favourites, anything you could ever want to do with whiskey, all in one place. It's the definitive whiskey companion.